book. Affiliated with University of Michigan. He's got his own Wikipedia page. I mean, that says it quite a bit. I mean, if you have a Wikipedia page, you've really made it, I feel like. I tried to create one, it was deleted instantly, because no one cares. So I think we'll get going with Mike. So we want to welcome Mike to the stage. Mike Rother.
Thanks, Brian. High five. Down low. I always miss on the down low. Well, good morning. Good morning. Thanks, Brian, and to the DevOps crew. I've never been to this venue. It's a really nice venue. I'm really impressed. It's a well-kept secret that this is here. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to all of you. I have a card here. Each one of you needs one of these for this particular presentation, so I'll just start them coming around. And actually, Brian, can I enlist your help? Just maybe start them on that row, and I'll start them here. And just take one and pass it on. And I have a confession to make. You guys are getting a raw deal. I've been working on the Toyota Kata practice guide for a long time. I haven't given a presentation in months, so I'm actually more nervous than usual, and I've forgotten everything that I know. So I really would like to apologize for the raw deal you're getting, but I'll do my best. I'll do my best. The slides I'm using will be made available to all of you, and I'm going to make them available in PowerPoint format so that you can adjust them. Sometimes I use a word, you might use a different word. So please feel free to use the slides, to edit the slides. We'll make sure that you get those. I'm also going to show a couple of videos. They're like 3-minute videos, and we'll give you the links to those videos on YouTube, so you'll be able to use those as well. All right. So, oh, it works. Wow. So, as I mentioned, there's just a Creative Commons copyright on these slides, so just follow that and you'll be fine. Let me start by talking about the investigations. I was going to say research, but Richard is here, so I'll call it investigations. There's something called action research, which is, I don't know, quotation marks. The investigations we did that led to the Toyota Kata book. And the other thing I'd like to say about the Toyota Kata book, which came out in 2009, there was no intention to write a book whatsoever. We were just trying to figure out more about what is Toyota doing in its management system. And what we learned was so interesting and so exciting and so helpful to us that it had to be written down, it had to be shared. So I'm glad you're interested. It has changed my kid's life. It's changed a lot of people's lives. There's a different way to look at things. In short, maybe, a lot of organizations have an entrepreneurial phase. At the beginning, everybody's geeked. You're very focused on a particular direction. You work iteratively. You experiment quickly. You're very excited. You're not worried about failure so much. You learn from the failures. And a lot of people talk about that as having been one of the most interesting and exciting times in their lives. And then that kind of goes away. The company matures, other people take over, or whatever. That entrepreneurial phase comes to an end. And then we work at the companies and we commute every day, and it's, more of a drag. Somehow, Toyota manages to keep some of that entrepreneurial spirit alive for 60 years, and that's interesting. So we knew something was different was going on at Toyota. We see Toyota's results. They've made profit for 60 years straight, except for 1 year. That's an unusual performance in the business world, 60 years of profitability. We knew something different was going on there. We'd spent years trying to copy their visible techniques. Richard, what did you call the stuff, the line? What was the line? Say it again. The line of representation. So we were on the side of Richard's line of representation where we're looking at the artifacts, as you called them yesterday. We're looking at lean practices, Kanban, Andon, things that you guys know about too. And we replicated those as best we could in factories and companies all around, some not even far from here, and never worked. We were never able to achieve the sustained entrepreneurial spirit, continuous improvement that Toyota somehow managed to do. So we knew something was missing. We also kind of knew it was in their management system, and some of our colleagues, whom you know, from the lean community, leaders, were saying, Toyota managers don't tell their people what to do, they ask questions, right? Okay, so we tried that, and we would tell managers, you can't tell your people what to do if you're working on a problem or a goal, you can just ask questions. And essentially what the managers did when we told them that, they said, well, I have the answer in my head, but I can't tell you, please try to guess what I'm thinking, right? We didn't think that was what Toyota was doing. So, but a management system is really hard to see. Again, on the other side of that line of representation, you have people's thinking, people's, what was the word you used with the C? Not the context, the construct. Cognition and the construct that people are using to get things done, how we work. Well, it's invisible. The first thing we did is we went to Toyota. We had lots of contacts at Toyota and executives. There's a Toyota plant in Toronto where they make the Lexus. At the time, it was the only Lexus plant outside of Japan. Very friendly. It's funny, when you come from a university, they open the doors for you. And we asked them questions like, how do you manage? How do you learn to manage that way? How do you teach other people to manage that way? And we got the standard platitude answers like, go see, show respect, you know, that kind of thing. And we assumed that there was a memo, and that if you told the University of Michigan researchers the secret sauce, you would have to commit ritual suicide. But later it occurred to us that the surrounding culture of an organization, the way of thinking, the way of doing things, is invisible pretty much to the people in the organization. And if you ask them about it, if you do a direct frontal, hey, tell me about your culture, they can't answer that question. And I think that's true in most organizations. So we had to experiment and try things, and then we would go back to Toyota and we would show them what we were learning, and they would give us input, and that would adjust our further trials and things like that. So basically it ran from 2004 to 2009, and we were trying to answer these two questions. Number one, what are the unseen managerial routines and thinking that lie behind Toyota's success with continuous improvement and adaptation, that invisible part? And the second question we were working on is, how can other companies develop similar routines and thinking in their organizations? I'd also like to tell you that I don't look at the first question anymore. That has become uninteresting to me after this research. My entire effort is focused on the second question. And it's kind of interesting. We spent 2 decades, what would Toyota do? You know, the joke is have a little bracelet, WWTD, what would Toyota do? You know, in my consulting days, people would say, well, what does Toyota do? And they would take notes, you know, and you felt like a real expert because you knew that Toyota painted this blue, or the end on board had 3 lights, or whatever, you know, that kind of stuff. Uninteresting. Not interesting to me anymore. The interesting question is, what do we want to do? Where do we want to go? And how should we work to be able to do that? How do we meet the challenges that we face? And what's cool about that is we're not copying Toyota's solutions anymore. We're copying their intention, and we're copying their, if you will, psychological routines for developing those solutions. And I think that's much more powerful. And I think it's the only way we're going to get into some sort of passing lane, if you will, where we can achieve what we want to achieve and distinguish ourselves from our competitors. And that goes for business world, and that goes for your personal life too. What do you want to achieve? What do you want to do? And I think adaptability is a topic that's as hot as it can be right now. You know, so that was the research. What did we learn? Well, we found out that there's this kind of scientific thinking. That's what I call it now. Apparently, Taiichi Ohno and a few others called it that sometimes. And it's a kind of a foundation or context, if you will, for improvement, adaptiveness, and the results we see at Toyota. So this hierarchy I've got here kind of shows you Toyota's results, very visible. 59 years out of the last 60, profitability, et cetera, et cetera. Their cars are reliable, et cetera. Now, if you go beneath that, you see the lean tools and practices. You go visit, you say, hey, man, you guys are doing great. Can we take a look around? You know, and they always said, sure, take a look around. Although, interestingly, when we asked them to watch their managers at work, they said no. Not that we could understand what they were saying anyway, since it was all in Japanese, but nonetheless, it was interesting that we could look at any of their artifacts we wanted to, but we could not observe their managers in operation. They wouldn't let us do that. But underneath that visible stuff is the less visible stuff. A systematic scientific way of thinking and acting, and managers as teachers of that way, and I'll talk about that some more. And that makes the context, that makes the air that they breathe, for example, it's the culture. It's the culture. And I think I've gotten more comfortable with the word organizational culture because I think it is changeable. It's not easy, but I think it is, well, not changeable. It's modifiable. It is modifiable, and we'll talk about that. So, look, I'm here to say if you're going to pick one of these two things to emulate, if you want to copy Toyota or their success, or lean, if you will, you could do the top or you could do the bottom. My suggestion would be the bottom one, copy that one, and then you can do amazing things. So what we found at Toyota was kind of a pattern, a way of thinking, a way of working. It's interesting because every manager does it a little bit differently, right? There's a high variety of styles, of approaches within Toyota. But if you look at it long enough, you start to distill out kind of a pattern. And it looks like this. It's a four-step, practical, scientific, if you will, way of doing. Anyone here familiar with the martial arts? I'm not. Anybody? Couple? Yeah, so what's a kata? What's a kata? So it's a set of movements you practice over and over again to create a habit, right? To make it kind of automatic. As Amin said, to put it into system 1, which is the automatic system, right? The habitual system, right? And there's another definition of kata, kind of two definitions. One in Japan is way of doing. Tea ceremony kata, way of doing a tea ceremony. But then there is a second definition, which is like these small practice routines that you practice to make something automatic. We use both definitions. This is the way of doing definition, and this is the way of doing or way of thinking that we found at Toyota. Number one, they usually have some kind of direction or challenge, often announced annually in the company. Some bigger thing that they're shooting for that cuts across multiple teams. Number two, they work very hard to grasp the current condition. Before they make any sort of plan, they say, we got to figure out what's actually happening, which is an activity that involves going to see, not just reviewing historical data, but actually going to see and figuring out what's going on and measuring and so forth. Then what they do is they establish a target condition, which is a much nearer goal on the way to the challenge. That's usually associated with a date. It's a hardcore goal. And then the fourth step of this four-step improvement kata pattern is they conduct experiments to get from their current condition to the next target condition. And as you can see, it takes multiple target conditions to actually reach the challenge. One of the interesting things is they don't set all those target conditions at once. Our tendency in the West is to say, let's lay out the roadmap for how we're going to get there. Toyota plans very carefully, but they have this unusual ability to think of a plan as a prediction, as a hypothesis. So they'll plan really hard, but they say, look, it's our best guess, our best prediction as we stand here about how we're going to get there. But they only set that target condition, and when they get to that point, they set the next one because they're going to know a lot more when they get there, right? So it's a little bit like a flashlight shining in the dark. You know, we're standing here where the lady with the magnifying glass is, and we have a flashlight, but it only shines to about here, down, a little ways down the path. How do you see further? How can you see further with your flashlight? Take a step, move forward. That's a good way to put it. And then all of a sudden, you'll see things that you didn't see when you were making the plan back here, that you need to consider, that you need to adapt to, right? So we'll practice this four-step routine this afternoon in the Kata, the classroom exercise session that Brian talked about. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So this is a model. This is a way of doing. It's what researchers do. They study a phenomenon, then they make a model to represent it. But the problem with the model is it's not real. It's somebody's interpretation of something. It's a representation of something. And like I said, there are a lot of variations of doing this way of working at Toyota. So, here's the second question. How can other companies develop similar ways of working and thinking in their organizations? That's that interesting question. A model is not enough. You can tell people about this all day long, but it's not going to change anything. I mean, their system 1 will always be the winner, right? This is in system 2. We are consciously thinking, oh, we should work that way, but the way we normally work, which is our habit, is going to be much stronger, right? So it's kind of sobering for academics to find out that all those models we published may be correct, but they don't change anything by themselves. We've had lots of models. We've had lots of models in the lean world. They didn't lead to change. Something's missing, right? What is that? What is that? Well, here's one answer to the question. How can we develop this kind of thinking and acting in other organizations and other companies? You can take that scientific thinking pattern, which is pretty much a universal pattern, it's not really a Toyota thing, and you combine it with techniques of what these days is called deliberate practice. Now, neither one of those two is new. Scientific thinking's been around in the form we know it, about 400 years. And deliberate practice, if you've been in sports or music, you know all about practice where you work on your errors and your coach says, please do that again. You're screwing up. You try to stretch yourself. You get into a learning zone. But I think combining those is an opportunity. It takes us further. Let's look at those two elements. Oh, and I should add one more thing, and that's the picture of the people here. I think by doing this, taking a practical scientific thinking pattern like the improvement kata or something like it, and combining it with deliberate practice gives us the ability to make scientific thinking a life skill that anyone can use. And I grew up thinking about scientific thinking as reserved for people who are scientists, basically. White smocked, have a degree, 2 or 3 degrees, right? I'm here to tell you it's not true. Anybody can be a scientist. Anybody can be a scientific thinker. Of course, there are degrees of it. You may not do controlled experiments, with your dinner preparation, but nonetheless, we can all learn to think more scientifically. What we're going to do with the Kata in the Classroom exercise, actually, we have some Detroit educators coming in this afternoon. We've been sharing this with schools. All we're trying to do is get more young people to realize that if they have an idea, they need to test it. As convinced as they are about I am so sure about my idea, this is the solution. Anybody ever have a manager like that? This is the answer. Or have you ever been in a meeting where there's a problem on the table and everybody's arguing about different solutions, and you go with the solution of the person who's the most persuasive, most dominant, or something like that, right? And so we're arguing about solutions. I'd like to shift that so that in the meetings we say, you know what, we don't know. We're at our threshold of knowledge. And what we're not going to argue about is the solution. We're going to argue about the best next experiment. And that's more of what you see at Toyota. That's what the Toyota manager would do. If you go over your threshold of knowledge, your manager will kind of knock you back and say, how? How do you know that? Show me. Do you have pictures? Do you have data? Did you go there and see it? And if you don't know, he says, well, how can you find out? They don't say experiment. They don't say scientific thinking. They don't even say PDCA, really. They just say, how do you know? You don't know. Okay. Well, how can we figure that out? How can we figure that out today? How can we figure that out in a way that doesn't hurt anything, like the customer or the next process down the line? Those are things anybody can do. So let's look first at, oops, I did this yesterday. Somebody did this yesterday too. There it is. Let's look first at scientific thinking, and then we'll look at techniques of deliberate practice. So scientific thinking, what is it? Why teach it? Please take that card. And I didn't save one for myself. It's all right. I know how it works. Well, you need it. You need it. Yeah? You'll watch? Okay. So take the card, and please flip it to the side that doesn't have the line, that looks like this or like the one on the screen. Some of you may be familiar with this. And put the dot on the left, just like it's shown on the screen. Okay, now you hold it in front of you, and what you do is you shut your left eye. By the way, this doesn't work for everyone, and if it doesn't work for you, you have to leave the conference now, but it was truly a pleasure to have you here. So, dot on the left, close your left eye, look at the dot with your right eye, and slowly move the card in and out. What happens? The plus disappears, right. People seeing that? Yeah, you got it? Okay. Wow, a lot of people got to leave. It's such a shame. We ordered so much food. Yeah, so at some point, and then you can hold the card still, the plus simply disappears. What's going on? Why does that happen? It's your blind spot, right. I think it's where the optic nerves connect to the back of your eye and there are no photoreceptors there, right? So at that point, you cannot see what's there. You are physically incapable of seeing the dot because you have no photoreceptors in that spot. You know, if you have both eyes open, one of them, one eye says to the other one, I got this one, right? Okay, all right, flip the card over. Now, same deal, put the dot on the left. This time there's a line. Put the dot on the left, close your left eye, stare at the dot with your right eye, and move the card in and out, exactly the same, and find that spot where the plus disappears. What happens this time? Yeah, all that disappears is this little vertical piece here. You still see the complete, contiguous, horizontal line. Yet we know we cannot see what's in that spot. Physically incapable of seeing what's in that spot. Thank you. So, what is going on? What's happening? Why? Yes? Your brain is predicting that the line continues. It sees the line on this side, it sees a line over here, right? And it says, probably continues, but it does more than just think that. It fills it in for you. Amazing. Okay. So the brain fills in. What our eyes are taking in is not unfiltered reality. Well, our eyes are taking in unfiltered reality, but by the time it passes through our brain, it's no longer unfiltered reality. What's happening is the brain takes prior experiences you have, priors, and it fills in blanks for you. So it says, that line probably continues. It draws the line in. You see the line. I find that just fascinating. What's really fascinating is the brain doesn't say, the line might continue, not sure, hold tight, please gather more information, right? It immediately, without telling you, jumps to conclusions, creates feelings of certainty based on the bits of information it receives. It fills in the gaps. We know a lot less than we think we do. So we have something that I call the knowledge threshold, or the threshold of knowledge. That's as far as we can see right now, and beyond that we ought to be experimenting, right? But our brain jumps ahead, fills in the blanks automatically, quickly, silently. It's system one, right? I mean, yeah. It was great that you presented that yesterday. It was really, both presentations yesterday. What a setup. We travel together, have been for years. It's kind of, so the problem is, of course, we don't notice these knowledge thresholds because our brain is filling in the blanks. We jump over them. We're certain that this is the right solution, and we go and implement it, and then we fall on our nose, right? Now, it sounds like I'm being negative about this jump to conclusions mechanism we have, but it's essential to our survival, okay? Just imagine if you're in traffic like this guy and your brain's like, well, that car could be coming into your lane, but I'm not sure, so don't worry yet, get more information, and I'll let you know once I'm certain that, you're about to be run over. We wouldn't be here today, right? It's theorized that our ancestors who heard a rustling in the bushes and turned and said, hey, I wonder what that is, and walked toward it, we didn't get those genes. But the ancestors who said there's a rustling in the bush and ran away instantly, those are the genes we got. But what's interesting about that is, so it's an important mechanism for our survival. It's fast, saves our limited cognitive resources. We only have so much system two, so much conscious attention that we can give. So certain things need to happen automatically, otherwise, when you start to drive a car, by the way, you got an engineer talking about the brain, be careful, okay? When you start to drive a car, where do you practice the first time? Parking lot, right? How come? Safety, you want to live, your dad or mom's like, yeah. Because if you try to concentrate on where's the brake, the turn signal, the mirror, those kind of things, your cognitive resources are pretty much used up. You're not paying attention to traffic. Today, do you think about where the brake pedal is, or how to operate the turn signal, or looking in the rearview mirror? Not at all. It's gone from system 2 to system 1, freeing up your cognitive capacity. So this jump to conclusions mechanism is highly useful. It's also a better safe than sorry mechanism, right? You may not be coming into my lane, but if I react and get out of the way, I'm going to survive, okay? But it's interesting. That helps us survive. But the response of, hey, I wonder what that is, and going to figure that out is also essential to our survival because it's one of the major ways we learn. Both are important. So don't let me give you the impression that this jump to conclusions mechanism is all bad. I think the key is that we need to be aware of it, and we can compensate for it a little bit. So, just to point out how it causes problems, I think I've belabored this point enough, but just read aloud the top line, please. Just read it out loud. Wow. Wow. It's not complete. You can read it. So you have this neural library that you've built up over your 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 60 years of living, some of us, yeah. The solidarity. And so, there's smoke, there's fire, you see the exit sign barely out of the corner of your eye, and you know where to go. Awesome. But it doesn't say that. It says what's down below. I made this, so I know it says that. I used to have these. Amin made a point like this yesterday. I used to have these on 2 separate slides, and then we discovered it doesn't matter. Look at the bottom one. That's what it actually says. Now look at the top one, and what do you see? Jumping to conclusions. That's a super highway in your brain, and it's very hard to counteract. So the answer to how can other organizations develop this kind of thinking in their organization is it's not possible. Thank you very much. Have a great conference. Right? Okay. There is a countermeasure. There is a countermeasure. And it's the one Toyota's using. And it's scientific thinking. And it's not a big deal. It's not complicated. I like a definition like this: a routine of intentional coordination between what we predict will happen next, seeing what actually happens, and adjusting based on what we learn from the difference, right? Cool. Now, if you're going to walk to the rustling in the bushes and get eaten, that's not a good experiment because the blast radius is too big. You want the blast radius of your experiments to be very small. This diagram captures it very well. There's a difference between, it's kind of what happens. You make a prediction, reality happens. If there's a difference, you're going to learn something. And that's the fundamental pattern of scientific thinking. Not that difficult, not that complicated. What's actually harder is teaching people how to experiment well. We have a lot of experiences with companies. Some of this research was done in Germany. We had 5 companies that were research sites very kindly for a period of years. German engineers. We want to test this idea. That takes 2 weeks. We got to make the parts out of aluminum. We have to have them approved and stuff like that. Today they can test any idea within 24 hours, and they're very proud of that. But they didn't know how to do that originally. So one of the things you as a manager can teach your people is how to experiment quickly, but to do that safely and cheaply, for example. All right. Nothing other than the learning cycle, process for acquiring knowledge, sometimes called plan, do, check, act. I don't use that lingo anymore because it limits it to a particular group. You can use words that are more general, like make a prediction, test it, get some data, compare what you thought would happen with what actually happened, evaluate, did you learn something? Do we need to change something? It may be the most effective way we have currently for navigating through unpredictable territory toward challenging goals, for moving our knowledge thresholds forward quickly. May be the best we have right now. And again, remember what I said. If you're going to copy something from Toyota, sure, you can copy the end-on cord, and good luck to you with that. The end-on cord is great. The Kanban is great. But if you copy this, you can go anywhere you want. And I assure you, so many people call me up. It's been 9 years since the book came out. So many people call me up and say, I started doing this at home with my kids. Now, for years, the lean community, we'd get calls, I'm doing 5S, or housekeeping and workplace organization in my home. And basically, it's the husband saying to the wife, why are we out of toilet paper again? Let's get some Kanban on these toilet. And, it's not a good thing, not a good thing. But if you take scientific thinking home and start working with your children about how to achieve things, I remember my daughter was getting C's on tests in chemistry or some class that she sort of liked. And she'd come home, she'd be upset, and I said, well, that's great. Now you know exactly what you need to work on. And she said, Dad, you don't understand. I need to get an A. Today, she lives in Seattle. She works for Sound Transit, and she sends me memes about experimenting, about, how screwing up is interesting if the blast radius is small, and how you're learning things. It's the same person. And I think if I hadn't written the Toyota Kata book and seen this stuff, she'd be in Seattle right now insisting that she's got the right solution. It's pretty cool, pretty cool. Why don't we try it? Let's try the scientific approach. All right, here's a number series, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. On a piece of paper in front of you, please write down what will be the next number, your prediction. What will be the next number of this series? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. What's the next number? I'll give you 20 minutes. No? Okay. All right, let's see. And the next number is 2. Now, some of you may have seen this before, right? So the next number is 2. Okay. So let me use the reflection section of the 5-question card, which is a little starter kata. It's on the Toyota Kata website. Everything there is free. Let's reflect on the last step taken. What did you expect? 14. Yeah, me too. What actually happened? We got a 2. Okay. Now we got to compare those two. So what did we learn? Not a whole lot yet, right? We know that it's not going to be 14. We don't know a whole lot. All right, so that's interesting. That was a little experiment. So notice that we're starting to learn via prediction error. What if it had been 14? What would that do? It reinforces the idea that we already had in our head. Exactly. So let me see here. Like I said, I had to make notes. I haven't done this in a while. It adds evidence to our existing thinking. That's what I wanted to say, right? So we don't actually learn anything new because learning by definition means something we don't yet know, right? Okay, so we're learning via prediction error. What theory did we have? It'd be 14. What theory do you want to test now in the next experiment? Okay, excellent, well put. Can we travel together too? So maybe 12 is the full set. It repeats after 12, it goes back to 2. Okay, well here's a question for you. If we ran this experiment 100 times and every time the 2, it reset and starts over after 12, would we be certain that on the 101st time it will do that? We're not. We're not. And that's interesting. See, anybody can be a scientific thinker. And at first, it's kind of scary, right? What do you mean it's not certain? We did it 100 times, it's always 2. It's 2, the sun's coming up tomorrow, right? And it's scary to have that taken away from you. And then it becomes liberating because you start to walk around through life and you go, it's not for sure, it's not for sure. I have to be ready, let's see what happens. Life gets more interesting in a way when you're a scientific thinker. So what would be a good response when we hit a knowledge threshold? What will be the next number in this series? What would be a good answer to that question? There I go again. What would be a good answer to the question, what will be the next number in this series? I don't know. More likely than not 14. I like that one. Let's try it and see. That's my current favorite. It's hard to say I don't know in the meeting, Pretty soon you're like, odd man, odd person out, The funny thing, again, at Toyota, that's one of the first things they teach you is to stop pretending you know. And for reasons that we'll talk about in a moment, the manager is the coach. The manager is your mentor. The manager is your trainer. Because the training has to happen every day, and only the managers are there every day. You can't have some lean team, they're not super people. They can't fly to every person every day. And also, as we talked about yesterday, coaching is one-on-one. Each learner has different needs at any moment in time, so the coaching is one-on-one. The manager can coach several people. The coaching only takes 20 or less minutes a day, but each learner has different needs. We tried group coaching. It doesn't work. Plus, people clam up. They don't want to talk about their problems in front of others, or they don't want to have the coach knock them, what looks like knocking them down, right? So one of the first things they do at Toyota is get you to the point where you stop answering to your boss like you know when you don't know. Now, I thought that makes, picture the workplace where you can say, I don't know, okay? So you're in a meeting, comes up, your boss is there, asks you a question, and you go, I don't know. You lean back and go, that was easy. I like this. You know, have a sip of coffee. It's not quite that easy. At Toyota, the manager says, okay, you don't know. Now, show me how you're going to figure it out. Show me your experiment. Because now my job as boss is to evaluate your experiment design and make sure it's a good one. To make sure you're testing it quickly, cheaply, that you've got a data collection approach, that you're going to measure something, that you're going to get enough measurements, not just one, that if the experiment goes bad, it's not going to hurt somebody or something, right? So then the manager shifts to that. Very interesting way of working. And a colleague in Germany wrote it. Will you stand up for a minute? Come on up here. So when we first started doing this stuff, managers and subordinate would face like this. What's your next experiment? You know, an answer. And it's still, and what happens is if you pursue this approach, I'm asking questions, or he's my manager. He's asking me, well, how are you going to figure it out? And that kind of thing. We start standing shoulder to shoulder, and we're both looking at, neither one of us knows the answer, right? So the manager is concerned that I'm working, the meta pattern is good, that I'm working in a good way, that my, Richard, what was it? Not context, construct. That the construct I'm operating with is good. And if it's not, he's going to correct me. I'm the one who's going to solve the problem. He just helps me work scientifically so that I acquire, like you said, the habit of working that way. Thank you. So you end up shoulder to shoulder looking at the problem together that both of you don't know what the answer is, as opposed to kind of a boss-employee relationship. It's interesting. We've watched Western managers come up to a process, there's a problem, the manager's seen this problem before, quickly instructs the people on what to do, and the machine is running again. And here's a Toyota person with me. And the Toyota person says, it's interesting, you have just hurt the company. And the manager's like, what are you talking about? We got the machine up and running, we're making again, we're making product. He says, you missed an opportunity to teach your person how to deal with that. You've undermined the capability of your organization. You only solved one problem. You didn't create problem-solving capability. Yes, get the machine up quickly. Toyota wants the machine up quickly too. It's not all happy, right? I keep doing that. Okay. So the improvement Kata is a practical pattern of scientific thinking. It allows us to move our knowledge threshold forward. Okay, so here's the thing. There's always a problem. Scientific thinking, is it something you're born with or learned? And there's a professor in Connecticut. What is it? I can't remember names. The Ivy in Connecticut? Yale, thank you. Bruce Wexler, he's getting older. You should read his stuff. It's so cool. So it's true that when we're children, if you look at little kids, they kind of explore like scientists. You know, they don't really have any positive or negative feelings. They're drawing on walls and touching hot things, and you know, they're sort of, and their brain is acquiring patterns based on their interactions with social interactions or their interactions with the physical environment, right? So they operate a little bit, they explore like scientists. But the bad news is, as adults, we are bad at scientific thinking for the very reason that we've acquired a library of neural pathways that allow us to navigate the world. The large print, you can get on an airplane and come to Detroit. Now take a 2-year-old and put them in the airport and say, okay, get to Detroit. You know, it's probably not going to happen. So what they have an exploratory mindset, they lack an ability to navigate the world. What we have an ability to navigate the world based on all those patterns and experiences we built up now makes us poor scientific thinkers. Scientific thinking is learned by definition, at least for adults. And that's the end of the conference? No, just kidding. So how? Remember that second question. How can other organizations develop similar patterns of thinking and acting in their organization? So how? How do we do it? And that brings us to the second point, techniques of deliberate practice. There's so much literature about this right now. John, you must be reading some of it, you know, the deliberate practice literature. It's fascinating, fascinating stuff. How do you develop new skills and mindset? Well, let's just try it. Again, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but humor me. Take a moment, cross your arms. All right. Now cross them the other way. Okay, thank you. So we made just a small change. We're not talking about culture modification. We're not talking about Kanban. We're talking about crossing our arms a different way, okay? That's all. How did it feel the second time compared to the first? Give me some words. Awkward, that one always comes up. What's that? Uncomfortable, that's a good one. What else? You had to be conscious about it, right? Conscientious, yes. Forced, that's a good one. Embarrassed. I'm embarrassed too, yeah. I'm embarrassed for you too, Brian. Confused. Somebody once said wrong. It feels wrong. It's just wrong, right? Okay. Yeah, here's some from other groups. Awkward is always number one. Slow, unnatural, stiff, uncomfortable, difficult. It feels wrong. I had to think about it, like you said, right? Okay. By the way, these are the very same words that you receive when you implement and try to introduce any change in an organization, right? We'll come back to that. Okay, what's going on? What's happening? I mean, you know the answer. What's going on here? System 2, System 1, right? So we've been practicing folding our arms for decades. Your brain doesn't want to spend a lot of time thinking about how to you're in a conversation, you want to focus on the other person and what they're saying. You don't want to go, excuse me, stop talking for a minute, I need to fold my arms, right? It's like the brake pedal in the car. It's automatic, but you've been practicing it for years. You have a 8-lane superhighway in your brain for how to fold your arms. You do not have to think about it, right? Until you do it differently. So we're in this loop. Every time we do something, we're more likely to do it again. That's what neuroscientists say. So we do something, it creates a little bit of a neural path in our brain, but that neural path in our brain makes it more likely that we're going to do it the same way. We do it the same way, that lays down some more tracks in our brain, and pretty soon you got a real groove in your brain. Remember, it's an engineer talking about the brain. Take it with a grain of salt. So, you know, the brain uses an incredible amount of our energy. It's an energy hog. It's only 2%. It's a little meatloaf. It's only 2% of our body's weight, but it takes 20% or more of our body's energy, right? So it's constantly looking for ways to save energy and push things into system 1 to make them habitual, automatic. I don't want to waste my precious cognitive resources on thinking about how to fold my arms. So here you are, on the left. These are neural pathways or synapses, if you will, the highways in our brains, take little attention or energy. Those are your habits. Those are things you know how to do without even really thinking about them. That's a photo, if you will, of an organizational culture. A very close-up photo, because each one of us has apparently 80 to 100 billion of these in our brain, right? Here's a neural pathway we haven't really used much before, right? That's folding your arms the other way. Very difficult to transfer the signal here, very difficult. And you get words like awkward, slow, unnatural, stiff, uncomfortable. That's what comes out when that happens. So that's what's happening. But let's go back to the question. How do you create this kind of thinking and behavior in an organization? You cannot beat those established neural pathways through sharing information. You can publish a Toyota Kata model. You can publish any model you want. You can give lectures. You can make the lectures really good. You can do them for 8 hours. You can do them all week long. You can have a few exercises in there. People are going to go home, and what's going to win? Their existing habits. And again, remember, it's a useful mechanism. If we didn't have habits, we'd probably be in trouble. Trying to fight the existing neural highways usually doesn't work. The learner will almost always automatically stick with or revert back to their old way of doing things, because it's physiological, not because they're being hostile. That's important for a coach, to look your learner in the eye and go, okay, this person is not being hostile, this person is being a human being, and they're using their system 1 neurons, and it's my job to help this person develop a new skill if they want to. They've got to want to. We don't think and act a certain way because we lacked information. We think and act a certain way because it's our habit. What would happen if you practiced folding your arms the other way 15 minutes every day for the next month? What would happen? You get pretty good at it. And there it is. I'm not saying it's the doorway, but I'm saying it's a doorway to the answer to that question. How can we create different, modify our ways of thinking, acting, organization? Yes?
Forget the original way?
Would you forget the original way? I don't know. But what doesn't work is fighting the path. What you do is you create new neural paths that eventually are more dominant than the other ones. But I don't think they go away. We were talking about it at lunch yesterday. Maybe if you're 5 years old, I started BMX biking at 50. I've spent some time in the hospital. My bunny hop it is a bunny hop. It is? No, it is. Just kidding. But when I ride with young people, and I've been practicing for 9 years, when I ride with young people who come to Ann Arbor, wow, there's a bunny hop. I can clear a curb. So maybe when you're younger, you can still change it more readily. But I think this neuroplasticity is there for a lifetime, so don't give up hope. So, although, I don't know. All right, so don't try to fight existing neural highways. Build new ones. Build new ones. And I don't think it's culture change, by the way. I think it's culture modification. I don't think you can change a culture, and you might not want to. There are a lot of good things about your organizational culture. It's more like a modification. Grow new thinking that eventually replaces the old. So here's a quick video that kind of drives that home. Let me just switch to that. It's 2 minutes.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
Thank you, that worked great. I need to add at that point, I've been beaten up by a few neuroscientists, which is really a pleasure. It really is. One of them said to me over lunch, maybe you shouldn't talk about the brain. And it was like, it's very good. I don't think, it's likely that the brain is not quite as mechanical, circuit boardy as they're showing it there. It's likely that 20 years from now, we're going to look back on our concept of the brain today and go, how could we have been so simple-minded or whatever? But there are some truths in there, and I think that's what's important to get. So I think this is an area of research in the world that we're just, we're still tapping around in the twilight, and it's good to keep that in mind. So this is where Kata come in. Finally, sorry, let's talk about Kata. I'm getting into it kind of late. So basically, there's another definition of Kata. We have those two definitions. One is way of doing, tea ceremony Kata, or the improvement Kata. It's those basic 4 steps. But then the other question is, well, okay, but how do we transition to what the model depicts, right? And that's where the other definition of Kata come in. Small practice routines, like you said, that you practice to make it a habit, like Amin said, into system 1. So what you do is you inject, I like to call them starter Kata to kind of distinguish it. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. You inject a slightly different behavior, a more scientific behavior in this case, that creates a slightly more scientific mindset, and over time you use that self-reinforcing loop to start to create a new habit. And I call it starter kata because a lot of people think these things are permanent. And in the lean world, at least, I don't know about your world, we take these practices at Toyota or these ideas and we think, yes, let's implement that. That's the word that's used. Let's implement that. And people make posters and hang it on the wall. A starter kata is just a booster rocket to get you going. It's like playing a musical scale. You don't play musical scales forever, right? But they help you get, and then you build on what you've learned the fingering on your instrument. It's become system one, it's become habitual. You don't really have to think about how to make a C on your clarinet. So now you can build on that skill and start to play music, right? But it's not just repetition. You have to practice the right pattern, i.e. you need a coach. This is practice that requires a coach because there's a correction. You're going to practice your existing neural pathways. The coach knocks you out of that and says, no, do it this way. You actually physically see a coach in sports holding the learner into a new position until it becomes a groove in their mind. And it also takes positive emotions. If the learner doesn't want to do this, then they're not going to imprint the new skill. However, no learner wants to do it, or not many learners want to do it at the beginning, particularly at work. So the coach, the manager, has to ensure that the learner experiences some successes pretty early on, that the learner starts to go, hey, I think I can do this. I'm getting better at this. Pablo Casals, in old age, I think in his 80s, was interviewed once. I think it was the New York Times or something, and it turns out he practices his cello 3 hours a day. He's well into his 80s. And then the journalist says, well, you're Pablo Casals. You've achieved every possible, recognition and achievement in cello playing. Why are you practicing 3 hours a day? And he goes, well, I think I'm getting better. Hey, what else do we got? I mean, what a nice way to enjoy the planet before you have to leave. Learn something. So there are simple practice routines for each step of the improvement kata model. At the top is the 4-step improvement kata model, but it didn't take us long to realize this ain't enough. We're sharing this. We're all excited about it. Nothing's changing, right? We're missing those practice routines. So there are starter kata practice routines so that you can begin to operationalize that pattern. That's what the Toyota Kata practice guide is about. It lays that out. Let me give you an example I found in the Netherlands recently. Anyone been to the Netherlands, Amsterdam? Those kind of places. They have a lot of bicycles, right? Incredible bike paths. The bikes actually have a lot of right-of-way compared to cars. So at the top, way of doing, the model, kata as a way of doing. The transportation authority in the Netherlands says, dear driver, look before you open your car door, right? Why? Bikes coming, right? Look before opening your car door. Let me back up here. See that guy right there? That's you giving a lecture about Toyota Kata. That's me giving a lecture about Toyota Kata. Look before opening your door. How's that going to work for me? What's going to prevail? I'm late. Shut the car off. Open the door. Damn. Right? Okay. So the way of doing that we want is up here, but by itself is not going to happen. So what the transportation authority said, dear drivers, please open your door with your right hand. So cool. It's a kata. It's a starter kata, right? Get into the habit of going like this. So that's the way of doing. That's the starter kata that helps you adopt that way of doing. Will that driver always have to open the door with the right hand? Probably not. But once they're in the habit, once the system one says, I always do the head check, you got it. You've modified the culture. I like that example. So there are aids. The funny thing is, in the business world, it's so hard to convey this. In sports and music, everybody's like, yeah, of course. In music, would you start playing the guitar without some fingering diagrams on your first day? Probably not. Or a coach. Here, dancing, right? When you start dancing for the first time, or playing the guitar, or whatever, what words would you use to describe your experience? Awkward, slow, unnatural. Hurt fingers. I got blisters on my fingers. There's a reference for anyone who's older. Uncomfortable, difficult, it feels wrong. I had to think about it. For 25 years in the lean community, we tried to figure out how to avoid adopting lean being so painful. How can we avoid people saying, awkward, slow, unnatural, stiff, uncomfortable. You know what? That's exactly what you should be feeling. If you're not feeling those things, you're not learning something new. I wish I'd have known that 25 years ago. Someone looked at me and said, "This is wrong." I said, "Perfect. That's how you're supposed to be feeling because we're trying to get something that's in System 2 into System 1. Okay. Let's see. So you can't implement Kata, you can only practice them. Let's take a look. Anyone know BJ Fogg? Anyone experienced with BJ Fogg? This is a great video. He never uses the word Kata, but he very much talks about the idea of starter Kata to develop new skills, new habits, new ways of doing things. And again, these are the videos that we'll make available to you. We'll send you the links. This one's 4 minutes.
I would have never expected that a year ago, that today I would be doing 50, 60, 70 push-ups a day. But all this is part of being obsessed with behavior. And one of the things that you need to do is practice changing your own behavior. And that gives you an understanding of how behavior works. Now, the way I arrived here was very much like the flossing, but a little bit different, and this was the equation. After I pee, I will do 2 push-ups. Okay, so I'd use the facility. Yes, technically you flush the toilet first, and then 2 push-ups. And you're done, and you go, awesome, okay? Okay, awesome, yeah. Well, after 2, it's really easy. You move on, then you do 5, then you do 8, and the current where I'm at now, I do 8, but I always do extra credit. So I tend to do 12 or so, and it adds up over the day. I end up doing, who knows, 50, 60, 70, depending on how much water I've had and other factors. The good news is that behavior and behavior change is not as complicated as most people think. It's systematic.
One of the best ways to get people to do behavior in the long term is to build their confidence and ability through baby steps. Now, I know you've heard the term baby steps before, and sometimes people trivialize that because it's like, baby steps, it sounds trivial, but it's not. Baby steps are super powerful. It's a way to help people continue to do harder and harder behaviors. And the way it works is this. If you start people out doing something easy, and if they feel successful doing that thing, they're much more likely to do it again because that thing becomes easier to do. That behavior, let's say it's walking 5 minutes, it's easier to do day 2, and naturally their motivation rises up. They're more hopeful and less fearful around that behavior. So as you have them take baby steps, you're letting them develop more ability and more motivation. And so you can ratchet up the baby steps and ask them then to do something harder. Maybe walk 15 minutes, day 1, day 2, day 3, and now here comes the magic. Not necessarily after day 3, but after a period of time of feeling successful, what I call success momentum. There's this moment in time that I call a springboard moment where they jump up and they're able to do something much harder. What seems to happen is their fear shifts to hope. So fear depressing the behavior. As they feel successful, then they become more hopeful than fearful. And notice as the motivation goes up, they're able to do a hard behavior. And I found that people actually select the hard behavior on their own, and they do this without me prompting them. The key is to help them take baby steps, guide them on the baby steps, and help them feel successful. That's how you tap into the power of success momentum, and you lead them to what I call a springboard moment. And boom, they'll do these harder things. I have people every week who email me and say, BJ, thank you, helping me succeed in these small ways. I was feeling so awesome about what I was doing and my ability to change. I did this super hard thing in my life. So watch for that in your own life, and watch for that dynamic in the lives of people you work with.
Good. All right. Thanks again. That worked well. So did anyone read The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg? Anybody? Yeah. With the peeing, it's like cue, routine, reward, right? So the cue is I use the toilet, and the routine is do push-ups, then the reward, he tells himself a little awesome that I did that. Again, I would like to stress that I don't think it's quite that mechanical and the Power of Habit book is a fun book to read, but it does present it in very sort of linear mechanical terms, and I think that it's quite possible that we're a little more complicated than that. But in that sense, the Kata topic is now 9 years old. We don't know all the answers. We've got some I'm sharing with you the sort of the basic concept behind it. You can take it and run with it. Create your own starter kata. Start with our starter kata, but then evolve your own. There's room for you to run with this. It's an open system. And basically through your experimenting is how I learn these days. So I hope that I'm almost done here. So if you leave this session when we're done, don't think of this as a fully baked, pure truth kind of thing. Take it as a picture along the way. This is what we're learning. It seems to be working. It's taking us further than just sharing models. But there's a lot more to learn, and a lot more to do, and the people to do that are you. And then share that. For 25 years, 30 years really, I was copying Toyota. I was in the lean world. Unprecedented access to Toyota due to a few colleagues I have who worked there, right? But it was a static thing. Like I said, customers would ask, what does Toyota do? As if it was a finished thing, and that was the best answer. This, because by its nature, it's a young topic, we don't have all those answers. And at first I thought that was kind of bad. People say, well, what should I do? You know, but now it's like, well, I don't know, let's figure it out. You know, and actually it's better that way. So anyway, I want to encourage you not to leave this room after this presentation thinking, yep, that's it. It's a baked cake, all done. There's also a coaching kata. The thing is, you can't practice alone. If you practice alone, I'm sure you've experienced this. You're trying to do something, you're not getting it, and then somebody comes by and says, oh, you're doing that wrong. Hold your arm like this, and all of a sudden it works, right? Because when you practice alone, you're going to practice your existing neural pathways. That's the way it is. So you need a coach to kind of give you inputs, feedback, you adjust, and so forth. So there's also a kata for the coach, essentially a starter kata for the coach, so the coach can learn how to coach the improvement kata. Now, here's the thing. It's pretty interesting for the consulting world and the lean world, which I'm not part of. I think it's an important thing. I think consultants are like bees. They pollinate, so don't get me wrong. But it's got to be daily practice. 20 minutes a day is better than 2 hours once a week. There's a thought. Nobody knows. Why do we do Kaizen workshops? And there is a place for Kaizen workshops. You know, those intensive 2, 3, 4, 5 day events where you really make a big change and at the end it's exciting, right? Why do we do those so much? It's theorized that the Japanese consultants that came over here 30 years ago couldn't be here every day. They had to come up with some mode of working that would fit their travel schedules. It's possible that that's why Kaizen workshops took off so much. Again, they're not bad, but they're not a good way to change mindset and behavior. Here, look at this. If these are days of work days, this line here, and in the red zones here, you're practicing the different way, maybe in an event or something, and the rest of the time it's business as usual, what are you actually practicing? Business as usual. You're not changing anything. So if it's got to be daily practice, only a little every day is fine. Don't overdo it. 20 minutes a day, and you need a coach. Who's the coach? Almost by definition. It's got to be the manager, your boss, your colleague. It can't be a consultant. It can't be an outsider. You can have consultants help you get started, but ultimately this has to happen inside your organization. Here is an example. This is a learner and a coach. These are all the things in red are starter kata that we use. They're all in the Toyota Kata practice guide. So for example, here she's using something called the experimenting record. And I made a mistake here. I've always chosen photos where the coach and learner look happy because I want people to do kata, right? So they look great, right? But frankly, when she first starts using this form, which is you have to write down what you are going to do, your step, and how you're going to measure it. And then you have to write down a prediction. A drop of ink is worth a pound of memory. You have to write down your prediction before the experiment. Nobody likes to do that. It's like, I know, this is going to work. Let's do it. Come on, let's get going. Action, right? No, stop. Write down what you expect and how you're going to measure it. Then you have to write down what happened. No interpretation yet. Just write down the data. Stop. Don't think about it. Just put down. Now compare. What did you learn? This is how she feels when she does that the first time. She doesn't like it. It's awkward, it's slow, it's forced, right? Good, exactly. And here's the coach. Here's the 5-question card. I was just using the back side of it. These 5 questions are the basic headings for a coaching cycle, right? And coaches all the time, why do I have to do this? I'm an experienced manager. Let me do this. I'll get this. We'll get the results, that kind of thing. This is awkward. This is slow. This is weird. She's feeling the same thing. Good. That's exactly what you're supposed to be feeling. If you're not feeling those things, you're probably not in your learning zone. However, once you get going, so here is a card. On the left is the 5 questions, the starter kata right here. This is just a little starter kata, booster rocket, get you going, get a pattern in your head. Once you start getting that, on this card it folds open and you can write down your own questions. What else do you like to ask? What do you like to probe? What works well for you? And you're starting to move beyond the starter kata to create your own style. That's important. Don't place, this is the musical scale. This is music. And that's what needs to happen. So, in sum, knowing is not the same as doing. Just because we have a model, I've never fallen off a stage, but it's not enough. Benchmarking, going to benchmark Toyota and other companies is not enough to make change happening. Number 2, scientific thinking is a great way to navigate, but it is not our default mode, right? Number 3, skills, habits, and mindset are wired in our brain. We had a presentation about that yesterday. Number 4, you can practice something called starter kata with some coaching to help wire your brain for scientific thinking. And point number 5, at this point, is a theory that we can modify an organization's culture this way. And that's what we're working on now. So I think there's a shift going on from 20th century lean to 21st century lean. In the 20th century, we did these periodic improvements. In the 21st century, it's really daily because you have to practice every day. 20 minutes a day is just fine. In the 20th century, that was led by a lean staff, some department in the organization that would go to various areas when it was time to do these things, but that doesn't really work for changing mindset and behavior. Today, it's the middle managers who are actually the coaches and the teachers. And finally, in the 20th century, we were all about eliminating waste and reducing cost. Look, that's an easy sell. You can go to any leader and say, man, with this, you can reduce cost and increase efficiency, eliminate waste. No leader's going to say no to that, okay? But we're talking more now about what's their strategic objective? What do you want to achieve? Which could be cost reduction, but shouldn't automatically be cost reduction. What do we want to do to differentiate ourselves from our competitors? That's a more difficult question, but it's a much more interesting question. There's a Toyota Kata website. It's a homebrew website, but everything I've been talking about is pretty much on there. You can help yourself to it. Nothing for sale there. These are the Toyota Kata books. This one came out in 2009. We now have the 2 new ones. This is the one I'm excited about that I've been working on coming out this fall. If you're interested, have a look. And if you're interested, give me some critical feedback. That's kind of the book where we've put everything we've learned in the last 9 years. And then there's Kata in the classroom. So at some point you realize working with adults is interesting, said from an adult. You realize that children, when you talk to a business audience, you have to get them, this is the old way we did it, this is the new way. First time I talked to a group of school children, I said, this is the old way we do it, and they're all sitting there looking at me like, what are you talking about? I have no idea. And you go, oh, they don't have all the habits yet. And so we've been sharing Kata, improvement Kata designed for the classroom with schools. There's 1,000 teachers in Italy, 600 in Germany, about the same number in Sweden, and a lot in the United States using Kata in the classroom. We'd like to share it with you this afternoon. It's a 90-minute exercise, easy to do. Once you run through the exercise, you'll be able to use it yourself. It's an excellent introduction to the improvement Kata that you can use.